What does Black History Month have to do with white people? That's what we're talking about in today's episode of The M&M Show. Welcome to The M&M Show. I'm Matthew. Unfortunately, Emily has lost her voice, so she is working behind the scenes, behind the camera today. It's that season of the year when viruses and other things are going around, but rest assured she will be back for our next episode. February is Black History Month, so we wanted to talk about that. Specifically, what does Black History Month mean for white people? I am a white person, obviously, so what does Black History Month mean for me? And by that, I don't mean that Black History Month is about me, because obviously it isn't. But why should I, as a white person, celebrate Black History Month? Many people don't understand the purpose and the meaning of Black History Month. I remember when I was in college, I was attending a small private university that was predominantly white, and there was a black student union there, and they would do events for Black History Month. And I remember thinking, why is there a black student union but not a white student union? And why is there a Black History Month but not a White History Month? Now, I didn't take that as far as some people do, where they're like, oh, it's racist if you have Black History Month. I didn't think that. I just wondered, why is there a Black History Month? Now, eventually, I did learn. It was a process. I can't say that there was like a single aha moment where it all just sort of made sense. But it was a journey and a process of learning and growing and understanding. As I began to learn more about American history, I began to understand why we have a Black History Month and why it's important, not just for black people, but for white people too. So with that in mind, here are 3 reasons why white people should celebrate Black History Month. Reason number 1, Black History Month helps us remember our past. There's no need for a White History Month because we're always celebrating white history. Only we don't call it white history, we just call it history. We don't overlook and ignore the contributions that white people have made, but we do overlook and ignore the contributions that people of color have made to our culture and our society. In fact, in many ways, they've been erased from our history. Now, there are several ways that this happens. For starters, we tend to whitewash our history and erase some of the uglier parts of it because we're uncomfortable with it. America has a shameful legacy of racism, and that undermines our self-concept of being the greatest nation in the history of the world. So when those 2 ideas are in conflict, American exceptionalism and American racism, we tend to ignore the racism so we can maintain that image of our greatness. When I think of history that's been erased, I think of stories like the burning of Greenwood. Greenwood was a predominantly black district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the 1920s, there were numerous black-owned businesses and shops, and the area was so commercially successful that it was known as Black Wall Street. On Memorial Day in 1921, 19-year-old Dick Rowland, who was black, had an encounter with 17-year-old Sarah Page, who was white. Now, it's not entirely clear what exactly transpired between the two, but as was often the case in that era, it was used as a pretext to accuse a black man of assault. Even though Page herself said she wasn't going to press charges, Rowland was arrested. On what evidence, it's not really clear. But he was imprisoned in the county courthouse. Before long, an angry mob of white men had surrounded the courthouse, demanding that the sheriff release Rowland to them. The black leaders in Greenwood also met to discuss what they would do, and some of them armed themselves and went to the courthouse to back up the sheriff and to defend Rowland. Violence broke out between the 2 groups and they started shooting at each other. The white mob went on a rampage through Greenwood, burning and shooting up businesses and people's homes. When the fire department showed up to put out the flames, they were turned away at gunpoint. The riot was so severe that the white mob even went after white families in other parts of the city who employed black people as cooks or servants. They demanded that those black people be handed over to them for detention. Families that refused were met with attacks and their homes were vandalized. The fear was that the black residents of the city were going to mount some kind of black uprising, even though this whole ordeal had been started by an angry white lynch mob. When it was all over, dozens of people had been killed and hundreds injured. The black residents of the city suffered the most casualties. Not only that, but Greenwood, that thriving black commercial district, was decimated. There was so much damage from the looting and the fires that in today's dollars, $32 million of damage had been inflicted. Now, what really astounds me about this story is not just that it happened, but that I was a grown man in my 20s before I learned about it. This was a hugely significant event in our history, and it's like we've almost completely forgotten about it. And there are countless other stories like this too. There's the Ocoee massacre, and the Rosewood massacre, and the infamous kissing case. And all of these things have been largely forgotten by most of our society. In fact, as I say those names, you may not even know what I'm talking about, because this part of our history has been so thoroughly whitewashed. By the way, I'll leave links in the video description where you can read about some of these events. This is why Black History Month is so important. The historian George Santayana famously said, "Those who do not learn from the past are condemned to repeat it." Unfortunately, it's often the case that even when we do learn from our history, we still sometimes repeat the same mistakes. But how much worse is it when we refuse to learn from the mistakes of the past? The legacy of racism in America is one sad example of how we have failed to learn and grow from our past mistakes. But Black History Month is about more than racism and the civil rights movement, and that leads me to my second point. Reason number 2. Black History Month is an opportunity to celebrate Black excellence. One difference I've noticed between the way white people and Black people tend to celebrate Black History Month is that white people usually focus on a few very famous Black Americans, people like Martin Luther King Jr. They'll post a couple inspirational quotes from some of his well-known speeches, such as the "I Have a Dream" speech, and that's kind of their celebration of Black History Month. Black people, on the other hand, will often talk about lesser-known Black Americans. You know, scientists, inventors, writers, poets, artists, people who did great things but are not household names like Thomas Edison or the Wright brothers. People like James West, who invented the electret transducer, which is used in 90% of microphones today, including in such things as telephones, baby monitors, and hearing aids, and probably in this little doohickey right here. Or Charles Richard Drew, a medical researcher who made advancements in blood separation and blood storage technology. He set up blood banks in Britain during World War II, helping to save many soldiers' lives. He also protested against the practice of racially segregating blood donations, being as there is absolutely no scientific reason to do this. In fact, he even resigned from his position at the American Red Cross because of their policy of racially segregating their blood donations. Sarah E. Good was the first African-American woman to receive a U.S. patent all the way back in 1885 for her invention of a folding cabinet bed, kind of like what we would call a Murphy bed. When it was not in use, the bed could be folded up for storage, and when it was folded, it also could be used as a writing desk. Then there's George Crumb, also known as George Speck, who invented something we all know and love, the potato chip. And that's just a few notable Black scientists and inventors. We haven't even mentioned the writers and the poets and the artists and the musicians and the entrepreneurs, people who made notable contributions to our culture and society, but unfortunately, many times they too have been whitewashed from our history. Black History Month is about celebrating their legacy and remembering what they have given to us. And that takes us to reason number 3. Black History Month inspires us to work for a better future. Why have we whitewashed the uglier parts of our history? And why have we overlooked the indelible influence that people of color have made on our society? Unfortunately, the answer is racism, or more accurately, white supremacy. In some cases, this erasure of history is intentional. People who believe in white supremacy can't tolerate the accomplishments and achievements of people of color because it undermines their theory of racial superiority. So they do everything in their power to discredit, downplay, and destroy the legacy of Black Americans. But more common, and more insidious, is the tendency to simply overlook Black excellence because it doesn't fit with our preconceptions. Even to this day, we struggle in our society with negative stereotypes of Black people. We don't think of them as brilliant scientists or inventors. It's just not our image of them. Maybe we recognize them as entertaining singers or athletes, but even these seemingly positive stereotypes can actually have a negative side. For example, the idea that all Black men are supposed to be good at basketball. Maybe he doesn't like basketball. Maybe he likes a different sport. Maybe he doesn't like sports at all. The point is, we overlook what they are contributing to our society because it doesn't fit with our image of who they are. These negative preconceptions were even more prevalent in the past. Black people were seen as inferior to white people in almost every respect. Less intelligent, less industrious, less virtuous. Because of this, the contributions of Black Americans have often been overlooked and ignored. Maybe we recognize a few especially prominent ones, like George Washington Carver, but even people like him are seen as a credit to their race. In other words, they're the exception, not the norm. And while we have made progress, many of these negative perceptions linger in our social consciousness to this day. Black History Month is an opportunity for white Americans to educate ourselves about the parts of our history that we didn't learn in school. Expand your horizons beyond the same 5 MLK Jr. quotes that everybody posts every Black History Month. Spend some time reading Black authors, or admiring Black artists, or listening to the music of Black musicians or Black composers, or learning about Black inventors and Black scientists. By learning about the forgotten parts of our history, you're erasing the cultural ignorance that plagues our society, one person at a time. But it doesn't just stop with you. You have influence on the people around you. You can teach your children to study and learn and honor the legacy of Black Americans. And you can share what you're learning with your family and friends. Imagine what a difference it would make if we were all intentionally learning Black history. Not just because it's Black history, but because it's American history. Imagine a society where we don't have to question anymore why we need a Black History Month, because Black history is always remembered and celebrated. Imagine a society where we're not afraid to talk about slavery or Jim Crow. Imagine a society where we're even willing to address our current challenges, like mass incarceration, police brutality, gentrification, or voter disenfranchisement. When we're willing to learn from the past, we can actually change the present, and together we can build a better future. So there are 3 reasons why white people should celebrate Black History Month. It helps us remember our past, it's an opportunity to celebrate Black excellence, and it inspires us to work for a better future. Since it is Black History Month, I wanted to promote something for the Stuff We Like segment that has something to do with Black history. So I decided to talk about the speeches and writings of Martin Luther King Jr. I mentioned him earlier in the show when I talked about how white people tend to celebrate Black History Month by sharing the same 5 quotes from his speeches, usually from the I Have a Dream speech. Well, I want to challenge you to engage with his writings and his speeches on a deeper level. Maybe pursue some that you haven't read or listened to before. You can find many of his speeches online with a simple Google search. And in fact, you can even find videos of his speeches on YouTube, and you can watch them. In the description for this video, I'll also post a couple links to the text of some of his speeches and letters so that you can read them for yourself. The reason why you should do this is that because the legacy of MLK Jr., like so much of our other history, has kind of been whitewashed and sanitized for popular consumption. He really was quite a radical thinker. In fact, many of his ideas would still be considered radical today. But you won't discover that just by reading those same 5 quotes. You need to dig a little deeper, read his writings for yourself. So that's what I'm encouraging you to do. Just to give you a glimpse of the real Martin Luther King Jr., I want to share this quote from his letter from a Birmingham jail, which I really think sums up his legacy quite nicely. I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. As you can see, King could be not only inspiring and optimistic, he could also be blunt and bold and honest, unafraid to call out the problems facing our society. We all could learn a great deal from his legacy. Thanks for joining us on the M&M Show. That's our show for today. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button and also subscribe to our channel so you can get more videos. Hey, and share this on social media so your friends can join in the discussion too. Until next time, keep the conversation going.